When my friend Ruby crossed single-handed from Mexico to the Marquesas Islands, she pointed out the boat Mar de Luz to me, which was in the same anchorage waiting for her to come in. She said, "You have to interview Ron. He has done fantastic trips and has lots of good stories." And it's true. He has sailed in areas where you don't meet a lot of other sailors. Let's hear about it. Welcome to Sailor's Life. Today I'm on Mar de Luz, which is a Freya 39. Ron's first boat he went to Chile with was a Spencer 42, built in 1966. This interview is a bit longer than usual, but you should really watch all of it. It gets more and more exciting towards the end. Hey Ron.
Hi Jutta, how are you?
Thank you very much for joining into the interview.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for thinking of me. I don't know what motivated you to do that, but so be it.
I think you have interesting stories.
Oh, I don't know.
So why did you choose a boat to travel with?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think I have traveled quite a bit. I mean, even from the age of, say, 7 or 8, my mother, who was from Peru, took us all to Peru. And I was there for 6 months, and that kind of whet my appetite for different cultures at an early age, you know. My father was kind of a water guy, you know, body surfer, paddleboarder, skin diver, ocean swimmer. So he got us all into the water at a young age, and I always loved the ocean. I mean, it's always been a part of my life. Well, sailing never really grabbed me until much later in life. You know, I just felt like, you know, I wanted to do things like surf and rock climb and go mountaineering and things that were a little more active than sitting on a boat and sailing around. But I just remember reading a book by Bruce Chatwin called In Patagonia. And I'm like, I want to go to Patagonia. One day I want to go. So I thought, why not sail there? I didn't know that I was going the wrong way. I mean, I didn't know that. So I left from Panama for Chile, right? I left after several weeks of getting the boat together and several weeks of waiting for the winds to be right to go out of the Gulf of Panama. Yeah, I sailed back to Ecuador. I made a couple stops in Ecuador and then took off again from southern Ecuador and went out. And a lot of people, when they go from Ecuador to Chile, I mean, there's one of two ways. They either kind of motor sail down the coast of Peru, you know, or they go offshore and out to Easter Island, maybe around Easter Island, and then come back in on the westerlies. I did something in between. I didn't want to go down the coast because I didn't want to deal with the fishing boats and the traffic and the current, the Humboldt Current. I didn't want to deal with bureaucracy in Peru because they looked at a sailboat like it was a cruise ship. They would charge you the same kind of money, you know. And so I just went offshore. The first tack was about 6 or 7 days, about as far west as the Galapagos, but I was further south than the Galapagos. And then I started doing these 2-day tacks all the way down the inside of the South Pacific High. And it was a 30-day trip to northern Chile, to Iquique. And it was amazing. It was so light and peaceful and beautiful. I don't think I saw 20 knots, but maybe 1 or 2 times. It was generally like, you know, 8, 10, 12 knots of wind, just light wind beat, just beautiful sailing.
But tacking.
Tacking, yeah, because I was going to weather. I was going into the wind, right? But it was nice.
And northern Chile, is that interesting coast-wise? It's desert, isn't it?
You know, look, you leave Panama, which is where I left initially, and then Ecuador. You're leaving verdant jungle, green, wet, beautiful, lush, you know. You come into Iquique. It is probably one of the, if not the driest desert in the world. There isn't a speck of green anywhere in the hills, and you come in and you see these brown sand mountains with nothing, no vegetation. And it's a real eye-opener. It's different, but it has its own beauty. You know?
Is there any life going on there?
Oh yeah, there's life. I mean, there's bird life, there's animal life. I mean, there's just no plant life, you know? It's like it's too dry. There's human life. Iquique is a thriving city on the coast with fantastic surf, you know? So I got to surf there. It was beautiful. You know, but no, it was a really interesting place to leave the boat. I mean, nobody goes in there. So when I went in there, they're like, oh yeah. You know, and they thought, here's a guy with a sailboat, he must be wealthy, and they overcharged me, you know, for the condition of the place. It was probably the most expensive place I stayed in outside of Mexico this last year. But it was worth it. It was beautiful. It was a good place to kind of start, you know, to work my way down the coast of Chile.
How many miles is this from north of Chile down to the Tierra del Fuego? To
Oh, you know, exactly. God, I'd have to look and see. It's a couple thousand miles, you know.
It is, huh?
But you know, when you're going down, I mean, you know, I would go offshore, I'd come in. I'd go offshore, I'd come in. You go off 40 miles, 50 miles, come in. You know, sort of like that. And I would maybe stop and anchor every 3 or 4 days, you know, in a place. So the further south you get, the greener it gets. It's like you leave the desert and you start to get into kind of the Santa Barbara kind of chaparral type countryside. Then you get into the kind of Bay Area, you know, northern Bay Area wine country. A lot of great wine in Chile. Then you get into the forest and the mountains, and you get into, you know, when you get down to Patagonia, you're in the fjords and the steep mountains in the Patagonia range of the Andes. I mean, so it really transforms as you go south, and so do the conditions. I mean, it starts to get really nasty at times.
So what did you think, what was the nicest part of Chile then?
Well, I'd have to say it's all quite beautiful, but the nicest part from Valdivia down, you know, Chiloé, you know, of course the fjords of Patagonia, you know, northern and southern, it just gets more and more dramatic. You know, this fjord, some of them are quite wide, and you get some shipping traffic through some of them, you know, in the south anyway. But it just goes everywhere, and you can go into these little things and get lost in steep, towering cliffs above you, and snow. I mean, in the middle of the summer, you can have snow falling on it.
I mean, looking at the maps, I wondered how you plan to go through these fjords. How do you plan that? How do you know where it's really nice, where you want to go, where you sneak
well,
in?
You're just like you guys. I mean, you do a little bit of research, and there's a fantastic guidebook for the canals of Patagonia. It goes from Valdivia all the way to Ushuaia and even to Puerto Williams. And it was written by, I think, an Italian couple, Abruzzi or something like this. And they spent years. They were planning on just being there for 1 year, but they were so taken by the place that they spent years, fell in love with it, and they wrote I keep this guidebook. I have notes in it because it is the most beautiful guidebook. I mean, not only does it have recommended anchorages, not all of it's 100% accurate. I've made some notes of the differences that I found, but beautiful little, you know, backstory on the culture, on the plant life, on the bird life. It's just a beautiful book. So I use that. For the other parts of Chile, I had the RCC guide, the Royal Cruising Club guide for Chile.
And the charts you use there?
And I used charts. I had both paper charts, which I would use just to keep, you know, I didn't do it so much there. I mean, I used the paper charts more for offshore stuff, for like Dead Reckoning, but I used Navionics on my iPad all the way down.
Oh, really?
And it was accurate, it was fine, it was great. I mean, there were places when I would come in the middle of the night, no moon, no light, and I'm looking at just my Navionics on my iPad to you know, safely get in. And it's pretty damn accurate. I mean, it's not always accurate. You don't want to just rely on that for sure, but because I've seen, like in Ecuador, where Navionics was off by as much as a half a mile. But most other places, it's pretty spot on. But there are a lot of uncharted places in Patagonia, so you have to be really careful. So you don't sail at night there. You're anchoring every night, and I think I told you before, you're not just dropping the hook. You drop the hook, make sure it's set, and then you run lines to shore. Because
so why do you run the lines to shore? Is there not enough swinging room, or is it deep to anchor?
Yeah, that's one thing. It's the depth is usually pretty good. You come in close to shore, so there's not enough swinging room sometimes. But the big thing is you get these katabatic winds. You know, you get these big polar lows that march across the Southern Ocean, right? They come and they develop, you know, and they hit the tops of the Andes. And so this wind just funnels down, gravity-fed rachas, katabatic winds, and you don't know when or where they're going to hit. They can take the path of least resistance, and I mean, it can blow, it'll be like 30 knots, 40 knots, which is common in Patagonia. Generally wind blowing from the northwest as you're sailing south, as opposed to the winds on the outer coast coming up south to north. But you know, whether you have 4 knots or 40 knots, that's kind of the range. Then you can get a katabatic wind and it'll blow 50, 60, 70, 80 knots.
Wow.
I mean, you know, so you have to be ready for that. You don't know when they're going to hit. And I had it a few times, but only when I was sailing, you know, and I was able to duck out of it and then get tied up.
You sailing on your own, how do you do that? That you anchor with 4 landlines just on your own?
And running landlines. Yeah, it wasn't always 4, but a lot of times it was 4. And a lot of times I probably didn't have to do it, but I would just do it just because it was a habit. And you develop a technique. And so what I would do would be I would come in, of course I would drop the hook and make sure it was set, and sometimes it wouldn't set. Sometimes there's a lot of kelp in these caletas, you know, little coves. and you make sure it's set, and then once you get your anchor set, if there's not too much wind and you're not swinging too much, then you run to shore to the windward side and tie a line off. A lot of these canals are you wouldn't believe it, but they're kind of fairly well traveled. They get maybe a dozen boats that go through there a year, if that. There's also fishing boats that come into these places at times, and so there are lines that are left, and sometimes you can just clip right into those. And if I was close enough to shore, what I would do, and I had long lines, and I had barrels on the stern, 2 barrels on the stern, 1 barrel in front of the mast, full of, I think it was like 100 meters each, or was it 100, something like that, you know, a polypropylene line, right? Polypro because it floats, you know. But if I was close enough to shore, I would run it out and then double it back to the boat, run it out and double it back. That way when I left, all I had to do was untie this end and I could go.
And you go around a tree?
Go around a tree.
Doesn't it shave off then?
Well, but see, there's usually a piece of rope around that tree or a piece of webbing around that tree, or there's something around a rock or through a rock, you know, like a chalk stone, and you clip. So you're clipping over, you know, webbing or rope that's already around a tree in a lot of cases, but not always. Sometimes you're just going around the tree, and you just tie a bowline into it, or you double it back, you know. But it's, you know, the first time I did it, it took me a couple of hours to get the boat set up. And that time got, you know, narrowed down with practice. I'm talking about a daily, nightly practice. It was every single day for, 2 months that I was in the canals, you know, just about, of tying the boat off, anchoring and tying the boat off.
Sure, if you anchor every night.
Yeah, no, and because you don't sail at night. And, you know, keep in mind that you're in the southern hemisphere, and these months of December, January, February, it's summertime, so the days are long, you know, and so you might make 90 miles during daylight hours. I mean, that's a lot for my boat, that was a lot of mileage, you know, for daylight sailing. But it was an experience, yeah.
But how did you prepare yourself with the cold? It must have been cold, no? Do you have heating on board?
You know, that's a good question. You know, when I left Half Moon Bay, California, where I started, I had a nice Dickinson Alaskan diesel stove, not installed in the boat. I thought, hey, I'm going to the tropics, I don't need this thing. I left it behind in my storage unit. Big mistake. And when I decided to go to Patagonia, I thought, well, when I get to Valdivia or Puerto Montt, I can buy one. Well, I went to Valdivia, I went to Puerto Montt. It was summertime. They didn't have heaters for sale. One guy said, hey, I'll make you one. I said, how long will it take you? It's 3 months. I said, too long, I'll be gone. So I went without heat. I had one little radiant heater that had a little, you know, 1 pound bottle of propane that was half empty. I saved that for the coldest, wettest day out of 60 days. But generally it was just, I would dress warmly. I had a lot of good gear, a lot of good mountain, for my days of mountaineering and climbing, I had a lot of good mountain foul weather gear. I had my sailing foul weather gear, I had sleeping bags. But the problem is things get wet, it's damp. It's damp, damp, damp. I mean, like in the southern canals, I didn't see the sun for 30 days. You know, I mean, and not until I got into the Beagle Channel did I see the sun.
So what about the social life? There are not many boats. You just
You're looking at
12.
it. This is it.
Yeah.
And you know, 20, 30 days in the northern canals, 20, 30 days in the southern canals, I met one boat, and it wasn't a sailboat, it wasn't a cruiser, it wasn't somebody who just done the Baja, forgive me. It was 3 guys on a fishing boat that had been out there for a month or so collecting not fish but algae. You know, they were harvesting algae. And I heard from them before I even saw them. I was coming around this point. This is about maybe 50 miles north or so of the Magellan Straits. And I heard on my radio, Velero, Velero, Velero. I'm like, see, ¿tienes café? I'm like, what? I'm like, who are you? Where are you? I'm like, yes, I have coffee. You know, they were around the corner. They could see my mast over the point.
So you must like yourself a lot, huh?
No. I'm trying to get to know myself, even, you know, after the last 90, 100 years. You know, I mean, no, I enjoyed it. It just was so strikingly beautiful. You would have these moments. You go, I can't believe I'm here, and there's nobody around. You know, but there was another form of interaction, and that was that I had to check in with the Chilean Armada every day. But there were no conversations, except for once or twice passing these manned lighthouses or personed lighthouses. But I would have to send a little email or something saying, this is my location, this is my heading, this is my speed, this is where I'm going to anchor next.
So that's the Coast Guard?
Coast Guard.
And they are watching you while you're
They're
sailing
watching
down?
Yeah, and if you don't check in, they want to know what's going on they might send somebody after you.
But this is caring. It's not controlling, it's
It's
caring.
not controlling, it's caring, because there's been so many incidents and accidents down in those waters. And when you're sailing alta mar, the open seas, the high seas, they require you to check in twice a day. It's not just sailboats. I mean, they require this of all the ships that come around. You know, you have ships that come through the Magellan Straits and then up, like they've done for hundreds of years, right? These are dangerous waters, and so the onus is on them to watch out for you.
On your way down,
Yes.
you even sailed out to the Isla of Robinson Crusoe.
Yes, I forgot about that part. How could I forget that part? That was Jesus. The further south you get, the worse the conditions are getting. So you don't want to do short tacks down the coast. It's just too much of a beat. So somebody suggested, a local Chilean sailor, said, Ron, you should sail out to Juan Fernandez Island. It's Isla Robinson Crusoe. In Spanish, it's Isla Más a Tierra, and there's Más Afuera. Sail out there, it's about 450 miles off the coast, and then you have a better line to sail into Valdivia. I said, brilliant, that's what I'm going to do.
It's quite a way to go, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a ways to go, but it was worth it. I mean, but it wasn't intense, it was just, it kept you on your toes. Because it was kind of, you know, the wind was forward of the beam, it was kind of a beat, winds were in a, 30, 35 knot range, maybe 40 at times. So the seas were kind of built up, but you get used to that. That's just the way it was there. But I pulled into this island, little anchorage, and it's kind of exposed anchorage. It's really deep. I'm dropping the hook here and there. I'm not getting anything to hold. Finally, I pick up a mooring. I don't know whose mooring this is, but I'm going to pick it up, and I did. And there was another sailboat in there. I couldn't believe it because people don't go there, And the next day I met with them, and they're friends to this day. It's a couple on a boat called Motu, right, island, Polynesian, that had been sailing since they were in their 20s. They were in their 70s. Anyway, great couple. I'm still in touch with them, but they went north, I went south. And the funny thing about this Juan Fernandez Island is once a month a supply ship comes out to supply the little village that's there. It comes out from Santiago, Chile. Once a month. Once a year, I was told, there's a cruise ship that stops in for 24 hours and they go. The next morning when I woke up, both the supply ship and the cruise ship were there. I'm like, what are the chances, Here I go to this remote place, and I don't really have it to myself, but I would hike up every morning to this lookout, and that's the lookout that Alexander Selkirk would go hike up to every day for 4 years. The guy was marooned on that island for 4 years, from 1700 to 1704, but he was on his own, complete. Now that's solitude. And so I was there about a week, and then I continued on my way, heading towards Valdivia, and then the shit hit the fan. Meaning I got into a storm that was pretty brutal. The worst I'd experienced at sea. And my friend was following me on my Garmin, or it was DeLorme then, InReach. I couldn't get weather forecast, but she's like, I see a big storm heading your way. I'm like, well, maybe I can make it to shore before then. She goes, no, I don't think you will. It's coming up and it's big, it's brutal. I'm like, oh, okay. And so I kept going, and the first day it was great sailing, like 15 knots wind, beautiful sailing. I had whales following me a whole bit. Second day it was 25-30, then it got 35-40, then it got 45-50, and the seas were building and stuff was breaking. It was nasty. I mean, the wind vane wasn't working to begin with. I tried to fix it in Valdivia, or in Valparaiso, and I wasn't successful. But my autopilot quit working. The mast track started separating, so I had to put literally bind a tourniquet around the bottom of the mast track. So I had to keep the sails reefed anyway because I was in hellacious wind. A lot of stuff started going wrong. My motor didn't run because it sucked up some fresh water. And I needed that motor not for motoring, but to keep my batteries charged because I had no sun. And I had no wind generator. So I would lash the helm down. I'd get the sails balanced, but it was blowing so hard that a lot of times I gave up trying to make it to Valdivia. I just headed off wind and, went with the seas and the wind. And it was kind of brutal. By the time I hit the continental shelf and the seas were shallower, this is short period, big wind swell. So, I mean, the seas were 15, 20, 25 foot plus, easily. I don't know. They were above the spreaders. And I just remember at times, like, at the helm, like I was dropping into a wave surfing, going, okay, it's time to kick out. Boom, boom, boom. I'd kick out and over the shoulder of this, kind of crumbling swell, get in the next one, boom. And I was surfing for hours. It was ridiculous. But I finally made it in around this point and into this big, I forget the name of the bay, big bay. But I spent 3 days stitching up my Dodger, bleeding the engine and getting it going again. Fixing, I actually fixed the mast track. I didn't have a rivet gun, but I, had some, drills and taps and stuff, and was able to thread new screws in there. So and I licked my own wounds as well. I mean, I took care of myself.
Were these times where you sometimes thought, get me out of here, don't want that anymore, or
I've had people say, in situations like that, they're like, don't you wish you had somebody with you then? And I absolutely not. That's the time I least want to have somebody with me, and because I'd be worried about them. I can hang onto the boat, and if I don't get hit or knocked off, you're okay. And you're not going to, unless the boat's going down, you stay on it, And was I afraid? Maybe deep down inside I was, but I didn't know it. I was just so attentive to what was going on, so focused with what I had to do to keep things together. Because last thing you want is to get broadside to some big swell and have it knock you over, or whatever, or drop down into a steep, trough of a big, breaking swell and pitch pole. So you have to be very vigilant, and so there's no time for that. I remember lying down. I'd maybe heave to for a while, to sleep, and I'd lie down below, and I'd hear this wham, a hissing sound. It'd be a wave, and boom, it would knock me over. I'd come back up. I'm like, holy crap. Hope there's not another one of those. But that would happen every once in a while, and you could hear it coming. And so, it wasn't a pleasant experience, but I got through it, and I fixed the boat up, and I licked my wounds, and I continued on, and I was very grateful to get into peaceful Valdivia, way up the river, into peaceful, calm Valdivia. So, yeah.
And being down south in Port Williams or Ushuaia, did you ever think about going out again to go around Cap Horn?
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. That was part of the plan. I mean, because I was under a time, frame, and I had to be in Port Williams at a certain time. There were times when I wanted to go out and go around Cape Horn and come back up, but it just wasn't good. If you're going, 40 south to 40 south around, you take what you get, right? Maybe you hold off, but I was kind of on a mission, and so I didn't want to beat myself up unnecessarily. So I thought, okay, I'm coming back next year. I'll take the boat and go around Cape Horn and then continue on to Antarctica. That was my plan. What happened was I left the boat, and you asked me earlier if I had people watch my boat. There was a guy there that did watch out for boats, and somebody said, oh yeah, you should use him. I think his name was Francisco. Nice guy. And he says, hey, I can do this for you. I said, well, yeah, that's not a bad idea. This is, it's a place called the Micalvi. It's a big ship that they've turned into kind of a pier, right? And boats side tie, it'll be 5 boats deep, 3 or 4 rows of 5 boats deep, almost all European boats. One time, a few months later, I got a message. It was Capitan, period. I'm like, sí, todo bien? Is everything okay? No. I'm like, what happened? He goes, the engine blew up. I'm like, shit. I mean, completely meltdown, complete meltdown. There was a guy there that ran this sailing school, and he says, Capitan, I'll buy your boat. I'm like, well, let's talk. And we did talk, and he bought the boat. Unfortunately, I did go around Cape Horn, but it was on another boat. It wasn't on my boat.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes I think about coming from here, Easter Island, and going around Cape Horn, but I don't want to go that direction. I want to go west. I want to go west.
You also sailed in Alaska, Aleutian Islands, and so you have sailed the same latitudes, north and south.
Right.
So what's the difference between the north and the south?
One's north, one's south. There are some differences, and let me just give a little backstory. I came into this boat, a friend of mine had this boat built in 1994 in Port Townsend. It's an older design, but he liked the design. He took this boat up into the Arctic, 76 degrees north, way north, hoping to get, to the polar pack ice and hike to the North Pole. He was a friend, he was an eccentric character, kind of talk about a solo dude, this guy was like, but people knew him. One time I came back from one of my trips, and he was kind of like a mentor to me, in a way. I came back from one of my trips, and I found him on his boat, practically dead. Literally. I ended up taking care of him for 3 months. The boat was a mess. He hadn't spoken to his brother for 25 years. He hadn't spoken to his wife for 12 years. He didn't want me to talk to her. Long story short, he died. I ended up with the boat. I wasn't planning on buying this boat. I didn't want to buy this boat. It needed so much work, but I bought the boat. One of his dying wishes, and here's what I'm leading up to, was to have his ashes spread in Yucatan Harbor in the Aleutian Islands. I said, okay, Jerry, I'll find a way to do that. At that time, I didn't know that I was going to have his boat. And he said, I also want a monument built to myself. I said, well, you'll let somebody else can do that. I'm not going to, I'll spread your ashes. So when I ended up with this boat, I had it for about 2 or 3 years before I did anything with it because it needed so much work. I had to replace all the through holes. I had to replace all the standing rigging. I had to redo, you know, because the boat had been rolled and everything had been knocked off. No solar, nothing. You know, that's another story. But when he was coming back down from Alaska, his last trip. But eventually, yes, I sailed in May of 21. My plan was to leave in late February of 21 and sail to Hawaii to Japan, up the Kuril Islands. That's what I really want to do because nobody sails up. And then along the Aleutians and then back down. But it was still kind of COVID and I didn't have time to get everything together. I didn't leave until the end of May. So I sailed San Francisco, 16, 17 days to Hilo, Hawaii. Slipped and broke my back on the way, 500 miles out of Hilo. Spent 10 days in Hilo, kind of rehabbing myself. And then I sailed up to Honolulu, Maui, Honolulu, Kauai. Spent some time in Kauai, Honolulu, beautiful place. And then sailed north to the Aleutian Islands and to Yucatan Harbor to spread Jerry's ashes. And I did that. And that was another hellacious scene. I mean, it was beautiful sailing all the way there, but going through Unimak Pass, and going into Yucatan, I got hit with some of these katabatic winds and you couldn't see a boat. I mean, it was big shipping traffic. You couldn't see any of it because it was all fogged in. It was another one of these brutal times, but I lived through it. But yeah, so I sailed Yucatan, the Bering Sea, Alaska Peninsula, across the Shelikof Straits to Kodiak. Then my son joined me. We sailed across the Gulf of Alaska. He got off in Sitka. I sailed north, back out up the Gulf, stopping at some beautiful hot springs along the way, Mirror Harbor, White Sulphur Hot Springs. Then up to Glacier Bay, and then down the Inside Passage, Southeast Alaska, right, Ketchikan, you know, Petersburg and all these places. Beautiful. And you asked me the difference. These are fjords up in the northern part of Alaska, or Southeast Alaska. The fjords in Patagonia. I don't know about the fjords in, in Scandinavia, but they're both fjords. They're both beautiful, amazing. But the big difference to me was, in Alaska, you always are in reach of somebody. You see a sport fishing boat, you see a commercial fishing boat, maybe another sailboat or 2 or 3. I mean, you can get lost up there, but there's always somebody close by. Little towns here and there. The Coast Guard based in Juneau is within earshot of everybody all over Southeast Alaska. If something happens, you're going to be okay. In Patagonia, you don't see anybody. You know, you are on your own.
And
easily.
what about the difference in flora and fauna?
Yeah, that's another big difference, and I was going to get to that. I mean, Alaska, you have big land mammals. I mean, I never saw any wolves, but they're bears, right? I mean, I was on this one island, Chichagof. I mean, big bears, big brown bears. You see them. You see their scat. I mean, you'll be sailing down the channels, and you'll see one on shore, In Patagonia, you don't see any land mammals. You see little ferrets and things like that. Beautiful bird life down there. Sea life is amazing. The whales, sei whales, fin whales, you name it. Dolphins, the birds are amazing. The albatross, there's a lot of different species of albatross and petrels and things like that. So land mammals, big. Alaska, Patagonia, nothing. Better sailing in Patagonia. Fewer people. Big difference.
Great.
Yeah.
So what are your plans now?
My plans from here is kind of an open book. I'm not sure, but to go west. I don't necessarily want to go to New Zealand. I'd like to find some place north of the equator to sit out the cyclone season. I think about going to Southeast Asia, Japan, but I've spent a lot of time in Japan and Southeast Asia, so I go back and forth. I don't have necessarily like this goal, this hard and fast goal to circumnavigate it. To me, it's just about travel until I lose interest. And then I sell the boat and do something else. But it's an idea. I don't call them plans because it's, how things change. I mean, so it's just a thought, one of many, So.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ron.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Blah, 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 caffeine. Too much talking.
Really great stories. I really loved
Oh,
it.
golly, God,
I
yeah.
wish you a good trip.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you.
No, I
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it. Thanks.
If you have any more questions that we haven't discussed yet, please write them in the comments so that I can ask my next interview partners about them. Subscribe my channel Sailors Life if you want to hear more facts, experiences and stories. Give me a thumb up and press the bell if you don't want to miss any of these informations.